Have you ever wondered what kind of a future the next 100 years will bring? It actually turns out that that's kind of been an exciting question for the past 100 years, even really since maybe especially since the industrial age. All of the possibilities that could come our way. I mean, who needs a flying car when you can have an airplane that attaches to your regular car? Or why take a baby on a stroll when you can have this creepy robot do it instead? Future's bright, huh? Or hey, need a haircut? Why not use this janky, industrial, steampunk kind of razor-wielding machine to do it for you? Or are you tired of always having to put the work into learning? What if you could just put a really cool cap on your head and some servant boy would go over to the crank and just like twist it around so that he could download all of the information right into your brain? Well, a lot has happened since the early 1900s, and a lot has happened since the 1900s too. I recently had an encounter where I realized that the future was finally upon us when I was driving home and I saw one of my neighbors mowing his lawn via remote control. It took just about everything in me not to stop and pull over and say to him, "Hey, you want to come over to my backyard and play?" Well, if you haven't noticed, about all of these predictions from about 100 years ago, and even some of the predictions of today, all kind of have this common thread. Less work. Less work. In 1930, a famous person by the name of John Maynard Keynes said that by 2030, we will only work 15 hours a week. Now, doesn't that sound nice? In 100 years, only 15 hours a week. Now, there is some good news. In the late 1800s, the average work week was over 70 hours. Now, think about that. That was often a dad going to the factory for these terribly long hours, or it was a lot of people who lived on the farm where work is just a way of life. So there have been improvements, and I hate to be one who adds to the bad predictions, but I do have a prediction, and my prediction is that probably in the next 50 or 100 years, we're still not going to get to that 15-hour work week. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is bad and one is good. The first reason is that whenever we have things that come to do more of the work for us, we end up filling that time with more things, don't we? And part of that is competition for resources and the nature of the economy. But not only that, the things that we accumulate, they require work too, don't they? It's this never-ending cycle. But there's actually a good reason I don't think that we'll ever probably get to the 15-hour work week, and it's this. We weren't made to do nothing. We weren't made to do nothing. We were made to make. We were made to produce. We were made to use our hands. We were made to use our brains. We were made to create. Work, when work is good, is a good thing. It's a good thing. But what do we do when our work isn't so good? Well, over the past few weeks, we've been in this series called Under Pressure, Faith for an Anxious Age. And we have been considering things like some of the challenges of intergenerational relationships and just some of the challenges that generations are having. And we found that our faith can bring us together. We've considered some of the pressures that come from mental health, and we've learned that it's okay not to be okay. And more than that, there's hope. We've considered some of the challenges of the digital age and technology and the pressures that come from that. And we've learned the value and the principle and the beauty of Sabbath and how we can bring that into our lives. But what do we do when some of the greatest pressures come in the area that tends to take up most of our waking hours? I was trying to think of some ways to capture some of the tension and some of the difficulties of work. And last fall, my mother-in-law captured this video of my 3-year-old that just felt like it summed it all up for me. Well, whether you go to school, whether you work regular 9 to 5 hours, or whether you work 9 to 9, or whether you stay at home, whether you're retired, work gives us meaning and it gives us purpose. But work can also feel unproductive. It can feel unfair at times. It can feel like it's not worth the energy. It can feel like it's just blowing and blowing a dandelion that just will not release its seeds. Maybe some of you today are here who feel like you just can't do enough. Or perhaps some of you are wondering in the work life that you have and serve in, whether you're really making a meaningful impact. And chances are there are a few of you who are just tired. You're tired of doing the dishes when the dishes just get dirty again. You're tired of the routine and the monotony that comes with it. How can we make work meaningful when so often work doesn't feel like it's worth it? How can we make work meaningful when we face a dilemma like this? Well, it turns out that this is not a modern question. The ancient Israelites, who were farmers and shepherds who made things with their hands, but were also administrators and business people and homemakers, they were facing questions just like this. And instead of turning to technology for an instant life hack, they had their own form of technology in the day. What they realized was that the answer was not going to come from a new invention. It was going to come from some conventional wisdom found in the book of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. Now, if you are new to Scripture and you don't have much experience in the book of Proverbs, I would liken it to, there was an old book in my school library called John Bartlett's Quotations, or his book of quotations. And we would thumb through that as we were preparing for a speech or a debate to find some of the best quotes. And Proverbs, they're kind of like that. Now, I know that's a bit dated. When the internet came, that kind of disappeared in some way. So a modern example that I thought of, and I'm a little bit ashamed to admit it because I kind of fall into the trap of reading these a lot, is the internet meme. Internet meme. I hear a grunt, I know. You thought that I was above that. I'm not. A meme is a picture and usually a caption that captures some truth in a memorable, often fun way. And here's one that I just came across that resonated with me. Today's 3-year-olds know how to turn on laptops and even open up apps. Me, when I was 3, I ate mud. So there's truth, a small truth to communicate, or something that we resonate with, something that's memorable. Well, before memes or books of quotations, there was the book of Proverbs. And as a general rule, in good Bible study, we want to read a verse within the entire context so that we know its meaning and so we're sensitive to its meaning. Well, in a sense, Proverbs might be the exception to that because it's kind of like a collection, some poetic collection of different ideas. Now, what we're about to look at today may be an exception to the exception, because sometimes the person who gathered all of the Proverbs together would gather them in a way that had a single theme. And we're going to look at Proverbs 16, verses 1 through 9. And the first verse and the last verse end with a very similar idea. It kind of encapsulates everything that's in between. Also, commentators have noted that every verse, except for verse 8, contains the word Lord in a way that's binding this together. So, Keep that in mind as we read together, and please follow along. Proverbs 16, 1 through 9. To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. All of a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. The Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster. The Lord detests all of the proud of heart. Be sure of this. They will not go unpunished. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. When the Lord takes pleasure in anyone's way, He causes their enemies to make peace with them. Better a little with righteousness than much with great injustice. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Well, reading a passage like this isn't probably the most liberating experience that a person could have, especially if we read it at face value. Each of these proverbs, or most of these proverbs, starts with a human's plans of the heart, a person's ways, whatever you do, anyone's way, a human's course. And it answers with the Lord's control. The answer comes from the Lord. He will establish your plans. The Lord works everything out to its proper end. He causes. The Lord establishes their steps. Have you ever put a lot of work into something only to realize that it meant nothing in the end? Like maybe you were preparing some flashcards for an exam that was coming up, and you went through all the work of cutting and writing them out when you realized at the very end of the book, there they were to be pulled out and used. Or maybe this one's a little bit more apropos to many of you. Have you ever spent hours trying to fix a computer when finally you looked and realized it was just unplugged? Well, if the Lord is the one doing the working, what's the point of all of the effort? But that's not quite what's going on here, is it? The Lord doesn't do the work. He doesn't do the stepping. He establishes them. He makes them happen. He brings about fruit. He makes them firm. It's kind of like the writer is saying this: we build the ship and we erect the sail, but the Lord provides the wind to make it go. Well, chances are there are some people here today who have built the ship. You have erected the sail, and at times it still feels like God didn't come alongside to make the ship go. Maybe you poured yourself out onto a career path, a potential career path, something that you dreamed of, only to realize that it wasn't going to come to fruition. Or perhaps you sought after a career. It was something that you wanted and something that you obtained, but after years in that job, you started to question whether this was really for you to begin with, or whether you made a mistake at the beginning. Maybe you're in a season, maybe you're a parent who stays at home, or maybe you're in a stage of retirement where you're experiencing the frustration of not being able to use your gifts as you once hoped and planned. So there are all sorts of scenarios where we could feel like we do the proper things, and yet the Lord isn't providing the wind behind them. Well, we're going to come back to this in a minute, but there is one thing that makes this scenario, this situation, potentially even worse. And it's this: when a person we know didn't put in the work and didn't put in the effort, and sometimes they even cheated their way up the ladder, and they're enjoying a greater payout than we are, that tends to really take the knife and dig it in the side just a little bit worse. One of the challenges of reading Proverbs is that we have to take into account that Proverbs are general truths. They're aspirational. And they often don't take exceptions. They don't often speak to the exceptions. So if you want a more robust conversation about the nuances of life, well, Proverbs is probably not the place that you're going to turn. At the same time, this passage may also be another one of those exceptions to the exceptions. Maybe you notice this in verse 4. The Lord works out everything to its proper end. And that's kind of a nice bow to the first 4 verses. But then he transitions to address some possible pushback. Even the wicked for a day of disaster. Now that language is kind of tough and can be difficult for us to square with a God that we know as compassionate. There is also, I think, a part of all of us, or at least most of us, that knows when there is something that is not right with the world, that has to be made right. And there's another term for that, and that's justice. And that's actually a term that the writer of these Proverbs is going to use a little bit later. Justice. What is unright must be made right. What's unright must be made right. This is where the writer starts to get a little bit nuanced. Sometimes it looks like the wicked they get their way, don't they? And that's not something that we always see in the book of Proverbs. The writer says this, better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. Not everything is as it seems on the surface. The easy way is not always right. Shortcuts sometimes short out. Just when it looks like those who do wrong are on the top, remember that God plays the long game. God plays the long game. Well, that might help us when it seems like things are just too unfair. When it feels like there are people who are being propelled to the top because of unrighteousness and despite all the work that we do. But chances are that work still doesn't feel worth it to us when we put in a lot of effort and a lot of hard work, and regardless of what other people get, work still doesn't feel like it's worth it. At the heart of this proverb is really as I see it, is really verse 3. And the writer says this, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. What does it mean to commit? I don't usually do this, but the Hebrew word behind that word commit is the word galal. Let's say it together. Galal. Nice. And what does that word mean? Well, it means commit. That's a good translation. But it can actually mean something else in different contexts. It can mean to roll something like a stone. Roll something. The reason I wanted you to say that with me is because you can kind of hear the action of that verb in the word. It's onomatopoeia, galal, galal. When we commit whatever we do to the Lord, we roll it to him. We make it his. We let it go. It's like saying, this is no longer mine. Well, the verse leading up to this verse 3, it could be glossed over, but it's really important too. Did this one stand out to you? All the person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. In the ancient world, there was often talk about weighing the heart. In fact, the ancient Egyptians, in some of their pictures, their reliefs, they would have a scale where the human heart was put on one side, and a feather was put on the other side to weigh what was inside of a person. Isn't that interesting? Now, that's not so different than what's going on here, because the word for motives here is the same word used for a person's spirit, a person's breath, even wind. Can you sense some irony in the fact that we're trying to weigh wind, we're trying to weigh breath and spirit? Now, I think one of the conclusions here that the writer is trying to lead us to is that a person's motives are hard to weigh. And sometimes they even elude the one who owns them. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes there is a part of me that masks the real reason I'm doing something. And in that moment, I don't want to know it. I don't want to see it. So it's like I'm divided into pieces. And there are parts that are hiding, that go to extra effort to hide a truth from me. Sometimes I do things because I'm afraid of failure. Sometimes I do things because I have a little bit of a competitive nature in me. What about you? If you're a parent who stays at home, when you discipline your children, do you discipline your children so that you'll look good as a parent? Or do you work hard, for those of you who are 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, do you work hard because there is something within you that is driving you and compelling you to try to please a father who could never be pleased? Is there a part of you that finds itself chasing after more resources so that you could provide your family with the security that your family of origin never could? We are not wrong to want nice things. Nice things are nice. It's not wrong to climb the ladder. It's nice to have nice kids. At the same time, could God be looking for something more in us? Could God be looking for something more? When his establishing winds come, will they tear through what is weak? Will they tear through weak motives when they're put in tension? Or when God's establishing winds come, will they blow through motives that have hole after hole in them? Or when God's establishing winds come, will they blow against the right motives and carry them to the place that they're supposed to be? Now, we shouldn't be surprised. God loves coming alongside plans that come alongside of him. He loves to establish those things. But what I found really surprising about this passage, it just caught me off guard, and maybe it caught you too, is that when the proverb writer talks about the motives of the heart, you would think that the next logical step would be for him to say, we must examine our heart, we must examine our motives, and we need to get them right. But he doesn't do that. Is it possible that he is just recognizing that this is the human dilemma? That a person so often can't really know what their motives are. And often we think that we're doing things for the right reason, but the truth is we're really not, because they're buried so deeply beneath. Is it possible that the writer is just making us aware of this? Because in reality, it's not such an easy thing. But here's the good news. He also doesn't leave us there. Commit whatever you do to the Lord. Roll it to him. Say to him, this is not mine. This is yours. This process of wrestling with our motives and our intentions toward him, he responds to it. He takes our motives. He catches them. He heals them. And then he moves them onward. He takes us to the next place. Well, chances are there are some of you here who have just maybe lost your taste for work. And that can be for a lot of reasons. Maybe you just find yourself, maybe it's a drudge getting up in the morning and you just don't want to get yourself out of bed. Perhaps some of you find your frustration in work and that something that you've been working on for a long time has been delayed and maybe doesn't seem to have a definite end. Maybe you feel so rushed that you're being pressed beyond your natural abilities and you just don't find a way to realistically produce quality work, the kind of quality work that you feel good about. Maybe for some of you it's relationships at work. They've become so stressed that just the word work takes on a different meaning. Or the expectations of you are so high that you can't possibly catch up. And perhaps, maybe there are some of you here who, when you look at your paycheck at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself the question, is this really enough? Is it really enough? Whether you're nearing retirement and you're thinking, man, I would like to leave this job, but if I leave this job, I'm going to have difficulties finding another job because they're going to hire somebody younger who they have to pay less. Or whether you're younger and in this crazy market that we live in, you find it difficult to imagine owning a home and living the dream that your parents did before you. But when we roll our plans, our hopes, when we roll what we do to God, something different can happen for us. We can experience joy under difficult employment because we know that we're actually working for someone else. We can find peace knowing that he multiplies our efforts, even if it's sometimes mysterious. We can even find hope knowing that God provides for us, even when it seems like there is very little. And even when we have good work, and many of us here have good work, when we have good work, when we roll that work over to God, that work can be elevated because it's serving a higher purpose. And God can do something with that work that perhaps we have never even imagined. The Lord can make work meaningful when we roll it over to him. So what does this look like? What can this look like for us? First of all, let's start with those of you who might find yourself in a season of struggle financially, or maybe even just in a place where you aren't meeting some of the hopes and expectations that you had. For those of you in that season, in that place in life, embrace a life where less is more. Embrace a life where less is more. A couple weeks ago, I finally made the decision to sell my snowblower, my beloved snowblower. It was sitting in my shed, about ready to pull it down the hill. I had only used it once. And the reason I got it in the first place is because we have a long driveway, and Amy was working off-site at the time, so I wanted to make sure that we could clear the driveway and if she had to get to work in time. So with that reason being removed, and since I'm a pastor and I only work a half a day a week, and it always snows on your day off and never on days that you work, I figured, well, I don't know that I really have a need for this. So I let it go. And it was liberating. Less stuff. But sometimes this stuff can demand our resources, whether it's our time and maintenance and repair, our finances to keep things going, or it could be beyond stuff. So what could that look like for you? Maybe for you that's cutting a subscription. Maybe it's changing the way that you eat or changing the way that you live. Maybe it's finding something else to get rid of or reevaluating your budget. It could be any of those things. When we lean into, when we accept our limitations, and when we trust God, and when we remain generous and not hold back, when we embrace a life where less is more, that could be our way of saying to God, it's yours. It's not mine. It's not mine. Second, if you're struggling to see meaningful fruit in the work that you do, play the long game. Play the long game. Maybe you're primarily working as a parent in this stage of life, and when you look at your kids, it feels like they take one step forward and they take two steps back. What could it look like to roll your work over to Him? Especially after a long day where don't seem to be going away. Despite what it seems, could patience and persistence be paving the way for something more? What could the payout look like on the other end? Third, when it doesn't seem like your work means anything, prepare your hearts for a work that's unseen. Prepare your hearts for a work that's unseen. Chances are you signed on to a specific task for a specific end. But is it possible that behind the scenes, God is doing another work? Last week, I visited somebody in the hospital down in Nashua, and a nurse came in and asked me what I did, and I said something like, I'm a pastor and I do Christmas lights, joking. They probably only heard the last part because they really dug on the Christmas lights. And then I explained something that we do around the holidays here at Christ Church, and she said, I've been to that multiple times. And we just happen to be looking for a church. Do you offer things for children? It's like, whoa, surprise. God can show up in surprising ways. That's not the work I went to do, but God opened up work for something different and something beautiful. And could God be doing that very same thing for you? Maybe it's not the task that you signed up for. Maybe it's not the end that you had in mind. But could God be establishing something better than you ever imagined as you're faithful and as you commit to Him all that you do? Lastly, and I like to stick with threes, but I had to add one more. Lastly, if you have entered into a season where your working life has changed, maybe that's because of retirement or health limitations, let God adapt you for the work that's good. And if you can do very little, you know what? You can still pray. And that's one of the most important works that He gives us. God has a vision. God has a vision for us, more than we could imagine, and sometimes even more than we can pray. Despite everything that is holding us back, if we lean into Him, if we take all that we do and we roll it over to Him, and if we say, it's yours, He can do something special with that. So commit to Him. Roll it over to Him. God's going to make a way.